Hey guys, welcome to another episode of From the Luthier's Workbench, brought to you by Highline Guitars. If you like building or repairing electric guitars, I encourage you to tap that subscribe button down below. And if you do, I'll take your luthier skills to a whole new level. In this episode, I'll be covering part 11 of the Steampunk guitar build. And that means I'm going to be installing all of the parts that I relicked in the last episode. Now, if you want to go back and watch the previous 10 parts of this guitar build, at the end of this episode, I'll be posting a link to a playlist I've created that includes all 10 episodes plus this one. So stay with me and let's get started. Before I could start assembling the guitar, the first thing I had to do was to wind up a set of pickups. And for this guitar, I wound up a really hot set of humbuckers. 20K for the bridge, 16K for the neck. Next, I installed the nickel-silver humbucker covers that I had heat stained with a torch. And to permanently install them, I soldered them into place with a 40-watt soldering iron. Then I added the humbucker rings, springs, and screws. That's the fiddliest part of assembling the pickups. Now, before I can mount the pickups and the bridge permanently, I need to dummy them into position and make sure that they've been placed properly with respect to the scale length of the guitar, which in this case is 25.5 inches, as well as you need to make sure that they are lined up properly along the guitar body's center line as well as the center line of the neck. So I'll dummy everything into position, and then I'll grab a ruler and I'll measure from the center of the 12th fret back to the bridge, and the front of the bridge where the strings come in contact with the bridge should be 12 3/4 inches, which is half of my scale length. Then I'll use a length of thread and I'll use that to position the bridge so that the strings will pass directly over the center of the pole pieces on the pickup. And I also need to make sure that the strings will be equidistant from the edges of the fretboard, meaning they'll be the distance from the string to the edge of the fretboard will be the same on both the high E and the low E strings. Next, I'll grab a marking awl and I will mark where I need to drill my pilot holes to mount the bridge. Now, before I mount the bridge, I need to drill a hole from the surface of the guitar body at an angle down into my bridge pickup cavity. This is so that I can route a ground wire from the bridge to the control cavity. A lot of people forget this step, but it's really important for both safety and noise to ground the strings, and you do that by grounding the bridge. And then the next thing I'll do is I will drill pilot holes to mount the bridge. Now, drilling a pilot hole is an important step in installing the screws to prevent the head of the screws from snapping off. But another technique that I use is I will coat the threads with paste finishing wax before I screw them into the wood. And then installing the pickups themselves is basically the same process. Now, several viewers had suggested that I airbrush rivets onto the body of this guitar for added interest, but I thought, why not actually add rivets? So what I did was I found some nickel silver furniture tacks, and I hit them with a torch to discolor them. Then I drilled pilot holes all the way around the perimeter of the guitar body surface, and then I just simply glued those tacks into the surface with some CA glue. Now I was ready to move on to the headstock and install the locking tuners. And to do that, I had to remount the hole for each tuner in order to ensure that they fit nice and snug. Now when it comes to installing and aligning the tuners, I just eyeball it. I don't really follow any specific method for doing it. I just like to make sure that the tuning knobs are spaced correctly with respect to the edge of the headstock. Then I installed the washers, the nuts, and tightened everything down. Now the tuners I'm using require the installation of very tiny screws in the back to keep the tuning pegs from spinning around. So to install those, first thing I do is drill a pilot hole, and then I will coat the threads of the tiny screws with paste furniture wax, which lubricates the threads and allows me to install them without the risk of breaking off the heads. I've had several viewers ask me if I have a Patreon account where they can send money to show support for my YouTube channel. I don't. However, what I do have is a website where you can purchase plans for electric guitars as well as many of the tools that I use to make guitars. It's called eguitarplans.com, and I'll put a link down in the description below. Think of it as a way to show me support while getting something in return. Now let's get back to the video. Next, I positioned and installed the truss rod cover, and this will be held in place by 3 of those tiny number 2 tuner screws. And I'll drill a pilot hole. I'll start by drilling just one, and then I will position the truss rod cover and tighten down that screw. Again, I'm using the paste furniture wax on the threads, and then I can move around the cover until I'm satisfied with its position and drill the other 2 holes. Now we're ready for the fun part, and that is to solder up all the wiring. And the copper foiling that I use in the control cavity, it also serves as a common ground for all my electronics. So all I need to do is solder all the ground wires to the copper foil. Then I installed the 3-way switch and wired the hot signal wires from the pickups to the switch itself. And I don't have to worry about grounding the switch because it comes into contact with that copper foil. All of the humbuckers that I make for my guitars feature 4-conductor wire, which means the series lead has to be soldered together and then protected with some heat shrink tubing. Next, I installed the volume and tone pots, and in this case I'm using long shaft pots to get through the thicker top. And like the switch, I don't need to ground the pots because they come in contact to the grounded shielding. My favorite capacitor to use on my tone pots is the 0.047 Sprague orange drop capacitor. For the volume pot to work correctly, I have to solder one of the outside lugs to the back in order to ground it. That way when I turn the knob, it'll send the signal to ground. Next, I will pre-wire the jack before I install it. That just makes it easier. The ground wire from the jack is then soldered to the copper foil, which grounds the shielding. All of my lead signal wires are single conductor shielded wiring. That means the center core is the actual signal wire, and then the shielding that surrounds it can be soldered to ground to prevent interference from gaining access anywhere along the length of the wire. In truth, the circuit in an electric guitar is among one of the most basic circuits there is. And as long as you're using really good high quality components like switchcraft switches, CTS or Bourne's pots, good quality capacitors, and really good quality wire, as well as really excellent soldering skills, you'll have no trouble soldering a high quality circuit that will last for many, many years. And one of the last things you want to do is snip away some of the excess wire just to clean things up and to prevent unwanted short circuits. Now, to tighten the controls down, I use a spanner wrench on the pots and an adjustable toggle switch wrench for the toggle switch. And now for the moment of truth, making sure that everything works. Oh, and let's not forget the knobs. And then the last item on the agenda, strap buttons. Well, that's all the time I have for part 11 of the Steampunk guitar build. In the next episode, I'll be covering the 12th and final part of this build, so be sure to check it out. In the meantime, take care and we'll see you soon.